19 years an MP, a cabinet minister for what, 10 of them? And now he's off to another adventure. Jason Kenney leaving federal politics, and he joins me now. Jason, thanks for the time.
Great to be here, Brian. Thank you.
19 years an MP. Did you ever think when you started this that it would be that long?
No, I didn't. Partly because I was first elected as a Reform MP, and we didn't know what would become of the Reform movement. But ultimately, I was elected then as a Canadian Alliance and then Conservative MP. I spent my first major project when I was elected, actually, Brian, was trying to unite federal Conservatives through what we then called the United Alternative Task Force. Visited over 150 ridings in 10 provinces, trying to kickstart a dialogue on cooperation between PCs and reformers. So right from the very beginning, we were trying to bring back together the broader Canadian Conservative family.
And that's what you're trying to do now with Alberta. I want to get to Alberta in a minute, but let's stay on federal politics for a little bit. Fondest memory?
Oh, in 20 years, the fondest memory?
Give me one or two.
Okay. Well, listen, obviously for me, coming from a military family, having ended up my government service as Minister of National Defense was a incredible privilege to work with the greatest Canadians, the ones in our country's uniform, to, for example, be on the right on the front forward operating line with the Kurdish Peshmerga and our Canadian Special Operations Forces 15 months ago, seeing how they're helping to defend innocent people from these genocidal terrorists. That was certainly a highlight.
You got to go right up to the front line.
Well, we could see Daesh, ISIL flags 2 kilometers from us.
Wow.
And see the people who are doing that work as close as you get to the front line. So that was a fascinating experience. Obviously, I would say that so many incredible people I've gotten to meet over these years, including one of my heroes, the Dalai Lama, who I've become, I think, a strong ally of, and so humbling to be able to meet heroes such as that. And some heroes you've probably never heard of, people like Baroness Cox in the Westminster Parliament, who helped to rescue hundreds of Sudanese slaves from their captors in Sudan, and people like that. So just the remarkable, true historic heroes that I've been able to meet in this work.
And I've been there for some of those, including, I remember, first time that I remember seeing you with the Dalai Lama was a scrum over in an office on the Gatineau side.
And we did it there to make the point. That was the first time His Holiness the Dalai Lama had been invited to do a meeting in a Government of Canada building. There's always this. There used to be, under the last Liberal government, this weird choreography where they would, maybe go and meet the Dalai Lama in a church or something, but never in a government facility, lest it upset
the Chinese,
the Communist Chinese Politburo. So I made the point of saying he's welcome on Government of Canada property.
And what I remember of him is his infectious laugh.
Yes.
And
almost like a boyish giggle and great sense of humor. Yeah, so a lot of amazing people.
When I first met you, when I got to the Hill in 2005, I remember chasing you down. You were still in opposition. I had a question to ask of you, and I called out Mr. Kenney, and you said, "That's my father. I'm Jason." We're both a little older, both a little grayer now. Are you Mr. Kenney yet?
Maybe I'm getting there. I'm certainly getting some white hairs in here, Brian. 20 years is a long time. It's a generation. And a lot has changed in the world, in Parliament, in our politics. But I said to our caucus this morning that I believe that I still have the same basic idealism and principles that I came here with. And for that, I'm deeply grateful, because my approach to politics has always been a conviction approach. I don't like politics as a kind of act of brokerage of interests. I believe that people should be here to advance and articulate principles and convictions and debate those ultimately in the crucible of our democracy and the floor of the House of Commons, the clash of ideas, not just the calculated brokerage of interests. And so I'd like to believe that while it's not to say I've never made any compromises while I've been here. I've learned to work with others, I think, more than when I first arrived, been a little bit more grown in terms of the virtue of prudence, but I think fundamentally I still have a sense of idealism and of conviction. Margaret Thatcher has always been one of my models in politics, and I'd like to believe that I've been true to her approach of persuading people about your convictions rather than just selling out and going with the flow.
You're smiling now as you talk about your convictions, and one of the knocks against conservatives is dour and they don't sell and they don't persuade. You're a happy warrior.
I hope so.
How do you come about that?
Listen, I think perhaps sometimes people in politics get the idea that they have to win every battle, and if they don't, it's a terrible thing. And sometimes conservatives project that far too much. I think we have to recognize all we can do is our best. And I feel like I've given it my all. I have left nothing on the table. I've worked as hard as I can. Many weeks working 80, 90, 100-hour weeks. Apparently I've been on over 1,600 flights in the past decade. I'm told I did over 6,000 events in the past 10 years, something like 2,000 nights in hotel rooms. I've gone all out to serve my country, to advance my convictions, and hopefully to make Canada a better place. So I'm pretty sanguine as I leave 20 years into this. I don't have any major regrets. I have some things I wish I'd done differently or more of, but fundamentally I don't have any regrets.
Before I get into where you want to go in Alberta, last question. You're mainly associated with multicultural outreach. Your time as immigration minister, I remember talking to your critics who were singing your praises for reforms that you were able to bring in. Is that a point of pride for you?
Yeah, I think some people try to stereotype me as some completely dogmatic conservative who wasn't incapable of compromise, but I think I proved them wrong consistently. When we had that minority government for 6 years, and by the way, Stephen Harper was the longest serving prime minister in a minority context ever, two relatively long minority governments. I had to work very closely with my opposition critics in order to get anything passed. We had to develop constructive compromises, and we found win-win situations. Like, for example, I managed to get fundamental reform of the then broken Canadian refugee asylum system through Parliament that saw the number of asylum claims fall from about 38,000 a year to about less than 10,000 a year, and the number of fake asylum claims fall overwhelmingly.
So but that was during a time when we were getting Mexico and Hungary, some of our top source countries for refugee claimants. These were the bogus ones.
Our number one source region was the European Union, and their citizens have 27 jurisdictions in which they can live and have residency. So it made very little sense to me. But anyway, you wouldn't think that we could get reforms like that through a minority parliament with the NDP and the Liberals holding the balance of power. But we did by being reasonable, listening, working out compromises. So yeah, I hope that some of that will endure this government, which seems a little bit vindictive. It seems like their central governing premise is to reverse everything that the Harper government did. I wish they would back up and recognize we made some very important reforms in an objective sense. We spent and risked political capital, for example, in our immigration, citizenship, and refugee reforms, changes that were supported by the vast majority of new Canadians that helped to clean up many aspects of a broken system. I hope they respect and preserve some of those changes.
I hope so as well. Convictions. What you said convictions are what drive you in politics. What are they? What convictions?
The dignity of the human person, the tradition of ordered liberty, as Edmund Burke called it, the idea that civil society and its institutions, the little platoons of a free society, the small communities, voluntary organizations, the family, these things are far, far more important to human flourishing and certainly to human freedom than the state. You know, conservatives, if they understand the root of their political philosophy, conservatives believe that human nature is not perfectible by turning dials through a huge government. We believe that, you know, the best approach to human nature is to harness that natural inclination towards self-interest for the common good, and hence our belief in markets and economic freedom, but also freedom for civil society, which is incarnated in our rights of freedoms of association and religion and conscience. So for me, these are the primordial values that govern my politics.
You're looking to take those values into Alberta now. Despite being an MP from Calgary for 19 and a half years, some people are saying you're a tourist in Alberta politics. You don't belong there. What do you say to that?
Well, I've been an Alberta resident, an Albertan, since the spring of 1992. And Alberta does not have an attitude that unless you were born there, you're a come from away. That's not the Alberta attitude. You have people from Cape Breton originally, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
No, not me.
But
I've been out in Alberta enough that you know everybody's from somewhere.
Everybody's from somewhere, and nobody's a stranger. And so this notion that because I wasn't born in Alberta, I was born in Metro Toronto. I grew up there and on the prairies, and mainly in southern Saskatchewan, in a small farm town. Summertime population of 250. And there's not a lot of difference between Wilcox, Saskatchewan, where I grew up, and any small town in Alberta. So I feel like an Albertan through and through. And I'll tell you this, I believe that my political convictions are shared by the vast majority of Albertans that believe in personal responsibility, initiative, enterprise, markets, fiscal responsibility. Those are the animating principles of Alberta's political culture, not the kind of beggar thy neighbor, class warfare, socialism represented by Alberta's NDP that's currently in office, which is why I'm going back, because I have encountered people facing so much economic pain. Grown men breaking down in tears in front of me because they've lost their jobs, they've run out of severance, they're running out of cash and credit, their families are losing their homes. People who poured 20 or 30 years into a small business and their life savings, working 90 hours a week, have lost those businesses. Others moving out of Alberta. Young people can't find 22% youth unemployment, record high insolvencies and bankruptcies. The story goes on, and I've just watched this happening in our province that used to be the center of Canadian prosperity. Is that something has to be done. We have a broken political system that allowed a almost accidental NDP government to win partly by vote splitting. And I for one, can't sit on the sidelines and watch that happen again. I believe if the NDP gets a second term, the consequences will be catastrophic for our economy and in some respects irreversible. That's why I've decided to leave a vocation I love, an institution I revere, in order to seek the leadership of a third-place party that's almost bankrupt, is at 20% in the polls, driving around the province in my pickup truck, living in people's basements and guest rooms to try to rebuild the Conservative family in Alberta.
Your summer tour, your Unity truck tour, follow you on social media, on Instagram and Twitter and so on, and your Instagram account went from posting things of interest of Canadian history or art that you'd see to Jason Kenney standing in fields or Jason Kenney standing next to monuments.
The world's largest Ukrainian Easter egg, Pisanka.
Yeah. So what was the tour like?
Awesome. I just loved it. You know, I've fallen in love with Alberta all over again, getting out there, especially in rural Alberta, just the authenticity of people, the natural beauty of the place.
I remember my first trip to Canmore.
It's breathtaking.
Absolutely. It was 2008 election. I had to go out early. The election was taking place over Thanksgiving, and I ended up with the down day. Drove up with some friends, some colleagues to Canmore, and was blown away. I remember emailing Ezra and saying, "Why do you people ever leave Alberta?"
Well, this is what maybe I'm asking myself. I'm having the time of my life getting out there. I love retail politics, just listening to real people and their real experiences, and the response we've been getting is phenomenal, because there's a huge number of Albertans, Brian, who took for granted the relative political stability in the province and the prosperity. Only half of Albertans traditionally have voted in provincial elections. But that 50% of the electorate now realizes that politics has consequences. Classic story. A month ago, I was filling up my gas tank for my pickup in Hardisty. It doesn't get much more Alberta than Hardisty. That's where the pipelines start. Pickup pulls up behind me, splattered in mud. A young fella jumps out, recognizes me, rushes up to me, says, Mr. Kenney, how long is it going to take for you to get rid of the NDP up in Edmonton? I said, well, probably about 3 years. He says, how come you can't do it faster? I said, look, I'm going as fast as I can, but they choose the election date, not me. He said, sir, you've got to speed this up, because my dad lost his oil field job a year ago, can't find work. He's now getting depressed. I'm very worried about him. And I'm only 17 years old, and I'm taking care of the whole family. I'm the only paycheck for all 4 of my brothers and sisters and both of my parents, and the pressure is getting to me too.
Wow.
So I hear that story everywhere I go. That young man never would have thought about, he wouldn't have known who I was or what the NDP is a couple of years ago, but now it matters. Those are the people who everywhere I go are coming to say, how do we get on board with this? How do we unite Alberta to defeat the NDP, get our province back on track, and restore the Alberta advantage?
Let me flip you back to federal politics just briefly, because I believe it's 90,000 Albertans have lost their job.
Yes, full-time jobs.
Full-time jobs. 68,000 men in Canada have lost their full-time jobs. And I look at those two things, and I look at the current government, and I think, because the unemployment crisis across Canada, particularly in Alberta, as I see it, is affecting men. But it's also affecting Albertans, and to me, those are two categories of people that aren't high on Justin Trudeau's list. Am I being unkind when I look at their response or lack thereof, and the reality that you're talking about?
I think it's fair to say that Justin Trudeau's politics is obsessed with identity. Excuse me, his approach is obsessed with identity politics, and that working class men in the oil patch in Alberta are not the first people he thinks about in his framework of identity politics. But you know something? Here's a guy who talks a lot about the middle class. I'll tell you what, the one of the brightest spots for the Canadian middle class in the past 20 years has been the Western Canadian energy industry. Ordinary, hard-working people, many of them don't have a university degree. Some do, obviously, but many of them just working with their hands, skilled workers, tradespepeople, making very good incomes, able to take care of their families. Some of them actually going and then starting their own businesses. If you want to see where the Canadian middle class has still been functioning very well and leading to prosperity, there's no better example than the Alberta energy industry. And those are the people facing enormous pain today. You know, one of the things that disturbs me is Mr. Trudeau and Premier Notley's constant obsession with the so-called new economy, by which they mean, and Mr. Trudeau said this explicitly, moving away from our traditional manufacturing industry. So if you're a manufacturing worker in Hamilton or in London or in Chatham, and your company is closing down because of the 40% increase in power prices and massive new taxes on everything, and that company's moving production to Indiana or Ohio, guess what? That's a result of this liberal, ideological liberal approach, and we're getting the same thing in Alberta. There are, so that this is almost like a purposeful, I think, attack on traditional blue-collar industries, manufacturing in central Canada, and the energy industry in Alberta. And I think it's completely wrong. We need champions of those core middle-class jobs, which are steps up in the ladder of social mobility.
I can tell you that from my own experience growing up with parents that had those types of jobs. Let me ask you, finally, make your pitch to people who are in the PC movement or the Wild Rose movement. They're not sure about this uniting thing. Why should they do it?
Because we cannot risk the chances of a second NDP term. The consequences would be a disaster for our economy. And look at what the NDP has done in 15 months. Imagine what damage they could do in 8 or 9 years. Look at 6 decades of economic and demographic stagnation next door in Saskatchewan because of the total domination of the NDP for that period. It took a free enterprise coalition called the Saskatchewan Party to bring people together across party lines to defeat the NDP under Brad Wall's leadership in 3 consecutive elections, winning 65% of the vote. I say to my Wild Rose and PC friends, we already have the Free Enterprise Coalition in Alberta that wins a supermajority of votes and seats. It's called the Conservative Party of Canada. It's the result of a merger between PCs and a federal version of the Wild Rose, the Reform Party, 13 years ago. We put it together. It's a big tent coalition. Everybody gets their say, although they may not always get their way. And we, as a federal party, won 3 consecutive elections, the longest-serving national Conservative government since John Macdonald in the 1900s. And in our toughest campaign in a decade, we won 60% of the popular vote and 29 of 34 seats in Alberta, 9 of 12 in Metro Edmonton, by the way. And we won 1.2 million votes last October, Brian, compared to about 400,000 for each of the Wildrose and PC parties that May. You build it, in this case, in the case of Alberta, 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, it equals 3. There's the power of synergy. You bring so many more people into the bigger tent, people who are sitting on the sidelines. So my message is, this shouldn't be difficult. We did it. We did it nationally across 10 provinces, 3 territories, 2 languages, with a lot more resentment, bitterness, and division. If we could do it there nationally, for heaven's sake, we can do it in Alberta. It will happen. It's a question of when and not if. So let's make the when before the May 2019 election. Finally, I say, look, I can see a scenario for either Wildrose or PCs to win the next election. But as long as they are fighting each other and competing for the same scarce resources, the NDP could win too. And that's a risk that none of us should be prepared to take. The Wildrose and PC parties are voting together in the legislature 86% of the time. I don't think we should risk our province's future to squabble over the 14% where there's minor disagreements. So focus on what unites us, not what divides us. Look to the future, not the past. Look through the windshield, not the rearview mirror.
All right. Jason Kenney, good luck. Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure covering you, getting to know you, and don't be a stranger.
Please come out to Alberta sometime, Brian.
Thanks for watching. Click here to never miss a Rebel update. Want even more of the Rebel? Well, click here to become a premium member.